Emily smiled as she packed her bags for her business trip. I watched her from the living room, my heart heavy with a gnawing unease that I couldn't shake. "I'll be gone for the weekend," she said, kissing me goodbye with a soft, almost rehearsed smile. "You're sure you'll be all right on your own?" I gave her a brief nod, too distracted by the feeling that something wasn't right to respond with the usual pleasantries. As she turned and walked out the door, the air felt thick, charged with a sense of foreboding that I couldn't quite place. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Until now, I had always been a patient man, never the type to jump to conclusions. But this was different. Over the last few weeks, small inconsistencies had begun to pile up, little things that, when combined, painted a picture I wasn't ready to face. She'd become too careful with her phone, too quick to go out for work on weekends. There was something in the way she avoided my gaze, something that felt like a secret, a hidden truth buried beneath her charm and sweet words. I couldn't let it go, not this time. So I decided to take action. Not in anger, but in silence. I waited until she left the house, and then, carefully, I installed a hidden camera in the living room. A quiet, steady setup that would provide me with the answers I needed. The next day I sat down to watch the footage, my pulse quickening. I knew I had to be patient, to let the truth unfold on its own terms. I watched the screen, my heart hammering in my chest, until at last the moment arrived. There she was, Emily, walking out the door with another man. A chill swept through me, but I remained calm, detached. The evidence was undeniable. She had been lying to me, and now I had her. Max's mind raced as the footage played on a loop, the undeniable evidence of Emily's betrayal unfolding before his eyes. He had suspected something for weeks, but now the truth was clear, laid out in crisp clarity on the screen. Emily had been lying to him, sneaking around behind his back. And yet, there was no rush, no impulsive need to confront her immediately. He knew he had all the time in the world. For the first time in a long while, Max felt a cold, calculating satisfaction. He wasn't upset, not yet at least. There was no anger boiling up inside him, no need to confront her in the heat of the moment. That wouldn't get him anywhere. Max had always been the patient one, the one who understood that in life, timing was everything. And now, he had all the time in the world to plan his next move. He rewatched the footage again, carefully noting every detail. The way Emily had kissed him goodbye with a practiced sweetness, how her body language shifted once she thought she was out of his sight, the way she smiled when she walked out the door as if she was perfectly at ease, like she had everything under control. That was the thing about Emily. She was always so sure of herself, so confident in her ability to get away with anything. But Max was different. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't going to let her get away with it. He had been patient, watching from the sidelines, waiting for the moment when the truth would reveal itself. And now, with the footage in hand, he had everything he needed. There was no need for confrontation, no need for drama. All he had to do was wait. Emily, on the other hand, was blissfully unaware of the storm that was quietly building around her. As far as she knew, her life was perfect. She had a husband who trusted her, a home that reflected the image of success and stability, and a lover who kept her world exciting. But Max wasn't like the other men who'd let themselves be deceived. He wasn't going to let her have it all. Days passed, and Max continued with his routine, maintaining the calm exterior that had always defined him. He went about his business, interacted with his colleagues, and kept up the facade of the perfect marriage. But behind closed doors, he was planning, slowly and carefully, the next step in his strategy. Emily had no idea that her perfect world was crumbling from the inside. One evening, as he watched her prepare to leave for another of her business trips, Max felt a strange sense of anticipation. This time, he didn't just watch her go. This time, he followed. Not physically. He wasn't ready for that yet, but mentally. Every step she took, every decision she made, he followed it in his mind. He was the silent observer, the one who saw everything and said nothing. Max knew the importance of being calm, of staying composed. He had seen the kind of people who rushed to confrontation, people who let their emotions get the best of them. They often made mistakes, They missed the details. They weren't patient enough. That wouldn't be him. He wouldn't give Emily the satisfaction of seeing him lose his cool, of watching him fall apart. He would wait, because patience was the key to success. And so, as Emily returned home that evening, unaware that Max had spent the day tracking her every move through the footage, he made a decision. He wasn't going to confront her immediately. That would come later. Instead, he would wait until the time was right. The moment would come when he could expose her for who she really was, without a shred of doubt in her mind. Emily, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to the fact that Max was already onto her. She believed her affair was a secret, a well-hidden part of her life that would never be discovered. She smiled as she unpacked her bags, completely at ease, thinking that everything was going according to plan. She was wrong. Max was already 2 steps ahead of her. He was in no rush to confront her or make his move. The thrill for him was in watching her unravel, watching her fall deeper into her web of lies, all the while believing that she was the one in control. And the best part? She didn't even know she was being watched. Max's mind whirred with the possibilities of what to do next. He had all the evidence he needed, but he didn't want to rush the reveal. No, the real satisfaction would come when Emily realized, in the worst possible way, that she had been living a lie. And when that moment came, she would have nowhere to run, no way to escape the truth. Max let the days pass, maintaining his calm facade, keeping up the appearance of the perfect husband. But inside, he was preparing for the moment of reckoning. The time when Emily would have to face the consequences of her betrayal. And when that moment came, Max would be ready. It was only a matter of time. The days dragged on, each one passing as if it were a test of Max's patience, but he never let his composure slip. The time to confront Emily had not yet arrived, and he was content to let her believe everything was still fine. She went about her usual routine, packing for business trips, laughing with friends, and continuing the charade that had lasted for so long. She had no idea that Max was watching, not physically, but through the lens of his hidden camera, studying every little detail as the plan he had patiently crafted was unfolding perfectly. Each day, Max spent hours watching the footage, replaying moments that would have gone unnoticed by most. He had always been an observer, and now, more than ever, he felt that silent observation was the key to his success. Every time Emily walked out with that same man, Jake, he felt a sickening sense of clarity. It was undeniable now. She was lying, and worse yet, she was doing it with a man who had no regard for the consequences of his actions. Max had always trusted Emily, and that was the part that gnawed at him the most. She had been his partner for years. They had built a life together, shared memories, and created a future. But the trust that had once held them together had now been shattered, piece by piece. It wasn't just the affair, it was the deception, the constant lies, and the fact that she thought she could get away with it. That was the ultimate betrayal, the belief that she was so clever, so untouchable, that no one could ever uncover the truth. But Max was patient. He understood that everything would fall apart when Emily least expected it. She thought she had the perfect plan, a carefully crafted facade of a happy marriage, a successful career, and an unknowing husband who was none the wiser. But Max had been observing, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment came, Emily would not only have to face the truth of her affair, but the reality that her lies would finally catch up with her. The confrontation, Max knew, would be the climax of everything, the moment when Emily's carefully constructed world would come crumbling down. But before he could do that, he needed to be absolutely certain. He needed to ensure that every angle had been covered, that no part of her story could be spun into a lie. He had already gathered the evidence, the footage, the small details, the quiet moments when Emily thought no one was watching. Now it was just a matter of timing. Max had learned over the years that patience was not only a virtue but a weapon. The longer he waited, the more confident Emily would become. The more confident she became, the more careless she would get, and in time the cracks in her perfect world would become too large to ignore. But Max wasn't ready to reveal himself just yet. He knew that he had to wait for the perfect moment, when she would be forced to face the truth without the possibility of escaping. One evening, as Max sat in his office, the screen flickering with another recording of Emily and Jake leaving the house, he felt a familiar stirring of anticipation. It wasn't anger, no, it was something else entirely. a calm satisfaction, the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing that the pieces are all falling into place. He had already calculated everything, every move, every word, every detail. The moment he confronted her, it would be the end of the line for Emily, and she would have no one to blame but herself. Max wasn't a man given to rash decisions or emotional outbursts. He had never been one to shout or make scenes. He was methodical, strategic, and most importantly, he was patient. He had learned long ago that the best way to make someone face the truth was to force them to confront it in the most undeniable way. No screaming, no accusations, just facts, just the cold, hard truth. It was early one morning when he received the call he had been waiting for, the moment when everything would change. It was a simple message from the private investigator he had hired weeks earlier. The investigator had followed Emily and Jake to a hotel, one they had frequented several times over the past few months. The hotel, it turned out, was the same place where Emily had been staying when she told Max she was away on a business trip. The evidence was clear, but Max didn't feel a rush of emotion. There was no anger, no betrayal, just the calm realization that the end was near. Emily's lies had nowhere to hide. That evening when she returned from another of her business trips, Max was waiting. He hadn't said a word, hadn't made any attempt to confront her, but everything had changed. The calmness of the evening felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. Emily walked through the door, her usual smile on her face, but Max noticed the slight falter in her step. For a moment she hesitated. It was a brief moment, but Max noticed it. She knew something was different, but she couldn't quite place it. Max waited. His voice remained steady, but his words held an unshakable finality. "Emily, we need to talk." She smiled, the same smile that had deceived him for months, but now it seemed hollow. She took off her coat, the silence between them thickening with every passing second. He didn't rush her. He didn't need to. Max had all the time in the world, and when the moment came, when Emily finally faced the truth, he would be ready. With a quiet confidence, Max reached for the laptop and pulled up the footage, the undeniable evidence of her affair, each frame a testament to her lies. As the images played out on the screen, Emily's face drained of color. There was no escaping the truth now. It was as clear as the cold, hard reality that had been hiding beneath her perfect facade. Max didn't speak. He didn't need to. The footage said everything, and in that silence, Emily understood. The perfect world she had built was gone, shattered by the very lies she had tried so hard to conceal. Now, all that was left was the bitter taste of her own deceit. Max sat back, watching her unravel in silence. The moment had come, and it was everything he had waited for. The silence in the room was thick and suffocating as Emily stared at the screen, her eyes wide and unblinking. Max could hear the faint tremor in her breath, the way her body tensed, as the undeniable truth played out before her. She had always been so sure, so confident in her ability to hide the affair, but now the facade had shattered. Max, sitting quietly across from her, observed every flicker of her expression, every subtle movement in her eyes. He had prepared for this moment for weeks, maybe longer, and now it was finally happening. Max didn't rush her. He let the footage speak for itself, the images of her walking out with Jake, their whispers and stolen glances, the moments she had thought were private, now laid bare for her to see. Each frame was like a hammer to the lies she had told, and Max knew, deep down, that no words were necessary. The truth was right in front of her, and the longer she stared at it, the more she would realize there was no escape. Emily's mouth opened as if she wanted to say something, but the words never came. Her usual confidence had been stripped away, replaced with panic and disbelief. Max could see it in the way she looked at him, as though for the first time she was truly seeing him. Not the husband she had deceived, but the man who had patiently watched, waited, and now held her future in his hands. She stood up abruptly, her movements sharp and jagged, as though trying to escape the suffocating weight of the moment. But where could she go? What could she say? Max didn't stop her, didn't speak, just waited for her to realize that she had no place to hide anymore. "Max, please," she whispered, her voice cracking as she turned toward him, hands trembling. "I didn't—" She stopped herself, as if realizing that any excuse she could offer would be meaningless now. Max remained calm, unaffected. His silence was his answer. and it cut deeper than any words could. Emily, still trying to gather herself, faltered for a moment, her gaze shifting from the screen to Max. The guilt was written all over her face now, but it was too late. The damage had been done. She opened her mouth again, but no words came out. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. Max watched her for a moment, taking in the tears that seemed to spring from nowhere, the emotional unraveling that had finally begun. But there was no sympathy in his eyes, no pity, only a cold clinical detachment, as if this moment had been inevitable, as if he had already moved on long before the confrontation had even begun. "Max, I'm sorry," she said again, her voice soft, barely a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you. It was a mistake. It meant nothing, really." Max shook his head slowly, his voice steady. "No, Emily, it wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. You chose this. You chose him." Her breath hitched, the weight of his words sinking in. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The guilt was overwhelming now, a heavy cloak around her shoulders that she couldn't shake off. But Max wasn't there to make her feel better. He wasn't there to soothe her, to offer her any comfort. She had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. He stood up slowly, walking past her to the window, his back to her as he spoke, his voice calm but final. "You wanted freedom. You wanted excitement. But now you have to face the consequences of your actions." Emily's eyes followed him, her body frozen in place. She didn't know what to say anymore. She could see it now, the way Max had been so quiet, so patient, watching from the sidelines while she had played her games, all the while knowing what was happening. She had underestimated him. She had underestimated the man she had spent years with. I didn't want this," she finally choked out, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to lose you. She stopped, her words falling short as she saw the finality in Max's posture. He wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't crying. He was just done. Max's eyes were fixed on the horizon, his thoughts a million miles away. He knew this was the moment everything changed. He knew that once this conversation was over, once Emily had been fully exposed for who she was, there would be no going back. She would never be able to look at him the same way again, and neither would he. Turning back to face her, Max spoke again, his voice low and firm. "You'll have to leave, Emily. This marriage, it's over." She looked at him, her face pale, her lips trembling. For a moment she seemed to shrink under the weight of his words, like a child caught in a lie, unable to escape the consequences of her actions. "No, Max, please," she begged, her voice full of desperation now. "I can fix this. I will fix this. Just give me a chance." But Max wasn't listening anymore. He had heard everything he needed to hear. There were no more chances, no more excuses. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. His decision had already been made. "I don't need your apologies," he said, his voice unwavering. "The truth is enough." Emily stood there, completely broken now, the reality of her situation setting in. There was no fixing this, no second chance. She had pushed him to this point, and now the consequences were irreversible. Max turned toward the door, his hand on the handle as he spoke, the last words he would ever say to her. "It's too late, Emily." With that, he stepped outside, leaving her behind to face the consequences of her betrayal. The door closed softly behind him, and Emily was left standing in the wreckage of her own making, finally understanding the full weight of what she had lost. Max had left the house, and the sound of the door closing behind him echoed in Emily's ears. She stood in the center of the room, numb, her eyes locked on the spot where he had been only moments before. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing in on her from all sides, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt completely, utterly alone. She had always thought she could control everything, her relationships, her career, her perfect marriage, but now the walls were closing in, and there was nowhere left to hide. She reached out as though trying to grasp hold of something, anything, that might bring her comfort, but the emptiness only deepened with each passing second. The reality of Max's words hit her like a wave crashing against a jagged cliff. It's over. The finality of it settled deep in her chest, a weight so heavy she could hardly breathe. She wasn't sure when her life had slipped from her grasp, but now it was all too clear. The affair, the lies, the manipulation, It had all led to this moment, and there was no coming back from it. She sat down on the couch, the familiar surroundings now feeling foreign and cold. The room, which had once felt like a sanctuary, seemed like a prison now, a reminder of everything she had lost. Max was gone, and there was no denying it. She could hear his words over and over in her mind. The truth is enough. There was no coming back from that. There was no excuse she could offer that would change his mind. He had seen through her facade, and now she was exposed for what she truly was, a woman who had betrayed the one person who had always been there for her. The guilt consumed her, swirling in her chest like a toxic fog. She had known, deep down, that Max wasn't just a passive bystander in their marriage. He had always been observant, always looking beyond the surface, and now she was paying the price for thinking she could get away with it. She never thought he would catch on. As the hours passed, the house seemed to grow colder, the silence more oppressive. Emily tried to move, to do something, anything, to shake the feeling of paralysis that had taken hold of her. She stood and began pacing the room, her mind racing with a million thoughts, all of them tangled and messy. What do I do now, she wondered. How do I fix this? But no answers came. She had no one left to turn to, no one to talk to. Max had been the only person she truly trusted, and now she had lost him forever. She grabbed her phone, her fingers shaking as she scrolled through her contacts, but she didn't know who to call. There was no one who would understand, no one who could offer her the comfort she so desperately craved. Her mind kept returning to the same question. How did it all go so wrong? The affair with Jake had seemed like an escape at first, a fleeting moment of excitement in the midst of her routine life. But it wasn't just the affair that had undone her. It was the lies, the secrecy, and the belief that she could continue living in two worlds without facing the consequences. Emily had convinced herself that she could keep everything in balance, that she could keep her marriage intact while indulging in the forbidden. She had believed that Max would never notice, never question, never dig deeper. But Max was different. Max saw things she didn't want him to see, and he had been patient, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Jake, the man she had thought could offer her a new beginning, the man who had promised her a life of excitement and passion. The message was short and to the point. Are you okay? Where are you? The words seemed so empty now, like a hollow echo of what they had once meant. She had thought Jake was her escape, but now he felt like another chain weighing her down, another lie she had told herself to justify her actions. She didn't respond to the message. She couldn't. There was nothing left to say. Minutes turned into hours, and the night wore on. Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a swirling mess of regret and self-loathing. She could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing on her chest, suffocating her. She had thought she could keep everything hidden, but now she saw how foolish that was. She had underestimated Max, underestimated the depth of his patience and the strength of his resolve. He had seen through the lies, and now he was gone, and in his absence, she was left with nothing but the truth that she had betrayed the one person who had loved her unconditionally. The next morning, Emily woke to the reality of her situation. The house felt quieter, emptier than ever before. She thought about calling Max, begging him to come back, to forgive her, but she knew it would be futile. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back. She had pushed him too far, and now she had to face the consequence. As the days went by, Emily tried to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, but nothing seemed to fit together anymore. She tried to reach out to her friends, but their words of comfort felt hollow, disconnected from the reality she was living. Max had been her anchor, her foundation, and now she was adrift in a sea of guilt and regret. She had lost him, and in doing so, she had lost herself. Max, on the other hand, was moving on. The silence he had maintained through the ordeal had given him the strength to walk away, to leave behind the woman who had deceived him. He was calm, unaffected by the storm Emily was now weathering. He had faced the truth, and in doing so he had found peace. The emotional toll had been significant, but it was a burden he would carry no longer. As he moved forward with his life, Emily's face faded into the past, a painful memory that would eventually be forgotten. For Max, the best revenge had been not in confronting Emily or even exposing her. It was in walking away, leaving her to face the consequences of her own actions alone. And as he did so, he found a sense of closure, one that Emily would never have.